The US dollar functions as the bedrock of the global economy. Today, cheap, asymmetric warfare, thousands of miles away, is testing that foundation for the first time in decades. For 70 years, the post-World War II system relied on an American-led order. At its center sat the dollar, with US military bases providing the enforcement mechanism to guarantee global trade stability. That stability is currently fracturing. Active military conflicts are now running simultaneously in Ukraine, the Middle East, and the Pacific. To most Americans, these events feel isolated and distant. In reality, the math of global trade means your financial security is tied directly to these specific fault lines. In 2024, global military spending reached $2.7 trillion. This 9.4% single-year jump represents the steepest increase since the Cold War. All 15 of the world's largest military spenders raised their budgets at the exact same time. The Bulletin of Atomic Scientists tracks this global anxiety through the Doomsday Clock. In early 2026, they moved the hands to 89 seconds to midnight. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, the closest the world previously came to nuclear exchange, the clock stood at 7 minutes. We are now measurably closer to catastrophe than at any point during the Cold War. This synchronized global rearmament acts as a structural stress test, pushing against the US-led financial order from multiple directions simultaneously. The first domino is a stretch of water just 33 kilometers wide. The Strait of Hormuz handles 20% of the world's daily oil supply, 20 million barrels keeping global economies functioning. Iran's strategy avoids a head-to-head fight with the US military. Instead, they target infrastructure, oil fields, desalination plants, and trade corridors, where a single strike can disrupt an entire region. This creates a crippling financial disparity. $50,000 Iranian drones are intercepted by $1 million American missiles, a massive disadvantage per launch. Markets react instantly. Straight shipping dropped 75%, pushing Brent crude over $110, and fertilizer up 35%. You feel this math at the gas pump and the grocery store. It is no longer a foreign policy debate. It is a direct increase in your cost of living. When a geographic choke point half a world away closes, the resulting price spikes enter your local economy immediately. The second front involves Russia's escalate to de-escalate doctrine. The strategy suggests using tactical nuclear weapons not to win a conventional battle, but to force a sudden halt to a losing conflict. Tensions peaked in 2025, when non-nuclear drones targeted Russian strategic bombers. These strikes hit the very systems Russia uses to deliver its nuclear arsenal. The US responded by deploying nuclear submarines to the region. This movement of strategic assets narrows the room for diplomatic error, as the machinery of escalation begins to run on its own logic. This instability has secondary consequences far from the battlefield. The World Food Programme warns that rising fuel and transport costs are triggering a humanitarian crisis in markets that have nothing to do with the fighting. Over 670 million people were already suffering from hunger. Now, the disruption of global supply chains ensures that geopolitical posturing in Europe and the Middle East manifests as food scarcity worldwide. The third front is the Pacific. Pentagon planning benchmarks identify 2027 as the year China expects to be capable of a successful invasion of Taiwan. Taiwan is the primary hub for the global semiconductor supply chain. These factories produce the chips that power everything from smartphones to medical equipment and military hardware. If Taiwan's status changes, neighboring allies like Japan and South Korea will have to immediately recalculate their survival, potentially seeking new security arrangements outside of the US umbrella. Losing Taiwan would likely halt the supply of advanced semiconductors and dismantle the Pacific security framework that has protected global trade routes since 1945. These geopolitical dominoes lead to a specific financial dependency. Gulf states are among the largest investors in the US stock market through their sovereign wealth funds. If these countries face regional destabilization, they may be forced to liquidate trillions in American assets to fund their own defense and desalination infrastructure. This means a conflict in the Middle East or the Pacific doesn't just stay there. It forces a massive contraction in the US financial markets and your retirement accounts. Wars rarely start by deliberate design. They trigger because the momentum of escalation makes diplomatic off-ramps harder to find with every passing day. Assuming that a plan is in place to stop these falling dominoes is a significant risk. The most effective way to protect your interests is to maintain clarity on how these triggers connect. Financial survival depends on identifying these geopolitical shifts before they impact your portfolio. To stay informed on the forces driving the global economy, hit subscribe. You probably woke up today feeling relatively secure about the money sitting in your bank account. But that currency depends on a global network of trade and security that is currently facing its most severe pressure test in 70 years. When you see news about active fighting in Eastern Europe or the Middle East, it's easy to shake your head and think, that's terrible, but it's happening over there. That assumption that distance equals safety is the most dangerous blind spot you can have right now. This diagram shows the operating system the world has run on for 7 decades. Built after World War II, led by the US, and enforced by global military bases. At the absolute center of this secure international commerce is the US dollar. The active military conflicts running simultaneously across the globe right now are not random, isolated events. They are connected. Multiple nations are pushing against this specific system all at once, attempting to dismantle the dollar-centric architecture that supports your standard of living. This chart shows global military spending over the last 40 years. In 2024, defense budgets jumped 9.4% in a single year, reaching $2.718 trillion. This is the steepest increase since the Cold War ended. 18 NATO members raised their defense budgets simultaneously. Poland is pouring 4.48% of its GDP into its military. Sweden maintained strict neutrality for 2 centuries. They stayed out of World War I and World War II. Yet in 2024, they raised their defense spending by 34% in just 12 months. Sovereign nations do not coordinate this level of capital expenditure by accident. They do it when they are genuinely frightened. The world's largest military spenders are pricing in the failure of the existing global security apparatus. The first pressure point is a stretch of water just 33 kilometers wide. The Strait of Hormuz is the most vulnerable geographical artery on Earth, and right now, shipping traffic through it has dropped by roughly 75%. This map illustrates the daily flow of 20 million barrels of oil passing through the strait. India draws 60% of its energy from this corridor, and China relies on it for 40%. Japan relies on it for 75% of its oil. Their prime minister has stated that if this route closes, their entire economy faces collapse within 9 months. Defending this region exposes a fatal flaw in modern military economics. An Iranian drone costs at most $50,000 to produce. The American defensive missile used to intercept it cost $1 million. Every time a drone is shot down, the defense takes a $950,000 loss. The strategy isn't to fight a conventional war. The play is to use those cheap drones to hit critical infrastructure. The Gulf region relies on 400 desalination plants for its drinking water. A single drone strike knocking out one of these coastal facilities threatens millions of lives instantly. When energy routes are choked and regional infrastructure is threatened, transport costs feed straight into the global food system. By early 2026, the World Food Programme issued an emergency warning about a rapidly unfolding humanitarian crisis far removed from the actual fighting. When Brent crude jumps past $110 a barrel and fertilizer inputs rise by 35%, the Pentagon's military power report is explicit. China expects to have the capability to fight and win a war over Taiwan by the end of 2027. That isn't an estimate. That is Beijing's stated military planning benchmark. The militarization is happening right now. In a single year, Chinese aircraft conducted over 3,500 incursions into Taiwan's surrounding airspace. In response, the United States approved an $11 billion arms sale to Taipei. If Taiwan falls, the global semiconductor supply chain, the microchips that run your phone, your car, and the entire modern economy, goes dark. But it goes deeper than technology. The moment Taiwan is captured, every allied nation in the region, including Japan and South Korea, has to recalculate its survival odds. The Pacific balance of power shifts overnight, effectively ending U.S. strategic dominance in the region. Which brings us to the nuclear question. The U.S. intelligence community explicitly warns of a Russian military doctrine known as escalate to de-escalate. If conventional forces start losing badly, the doctrine calls for detonating a tactical nuclear weapon, not to win the battlefield, but to freeze the war entirely. We are already seeing the warning signs. In mid-2025, a non-nuclear nation deliberately launched drone strikes against strategic bombers housed near Russia's nuclear assets. Analysts consider this one of the most destabilizing military actions in years. The conflict is drawing in new actors. North Korea sent over 15,000 troops to fight alongside Russia. At the exact same time, Pyongyang has been aggressively testing advanced hypersonic intercontinental ballistic missiles. The true danger here isn't intentional global annihilation. It is an accident. With multiple nuclear-armed states in active conflict, there is an almost complete absence of communication regarding strategic stability between adversaries. The conditions for a catastrophic miscalculation are perfect. All of this physical destruction leads directly back to your wallet. Gulf states are massive investors in American financial markets. If regional war destabilizes those countries, their sovereign wealth funds will be forced to rapidly liquidate their assets just to fund their own defense. When billions of dollars in foreign capital are suddenly pulled from the system, it triggers a catastrophic drop in the American stock market. The US dollar is currently buckling under a synchronized multi-front stress test. Russia pushes in Eastern Europe, Iran pushes in the Middle East, and China prepares to push in the Pacific. The group that invented the Doomsday Clock during the Cold War has moved it to 89 seconds to midnight. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, the clock sat at 7 minutes. We are now measurably closer to catastrophe than during the most dangerous standoff of the 20th century. Assuming the people in charge have a carefully controlled plan is a mistake. Wars rarely start because someone decided they wanted one. They start because the machinery of escalation runs on its own logic. And right now, that machinery is physically destroying the infrastructure that keeps your retirement accounts intact. To survive this shift in global power, you have to watch the dominoes fall before they reach you. You need to understand the economic arithmetic, not rely on political hope. Like this video and subscribe to Dollar Logic USA so you can see the math behind the headlines.